just wait for everybody to settle down. If everybody doesn't know who's standing next to me, this is Mr. Ian Joseph, who's from Manoka and who does a tremendous amount of support for families who have got nowhere to turn. He has offered his services free of charge to phone them. If anybody's in trouble, they can phone him, leave a message, and Mr. Joseph phones them back and advises. Now I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Joseph.
Hello, hello. Can people hear me? Just about. Right. I don't want you to think of me as an extremist, as some people might. So if you want my opinion, for example, of social workers, judges, guardians, experts, and hangers-on, I'll say quite simply, they're a load of scumbags who should be locked up. Sorry?
When this first happened, I was directed to your website, and I thought you were a complete lunatic. And now I realise everything on that website is completely true.
Well, I do on my website, I promise you that any case I quote, I take it from the newspapers and reprint what the newspapers have said. The difference is that one newspaper looks like one case, but when I put about 50 cases next to each other, it has a sort of impact. Now, I'd like to read you, I don't generally read things, but I would like to read you this. And first I'll turn my mobile phone off, which is just ringing somebody else.
Gives me a perfect interruption. Well, can I just remind everybody, please, for any questions or comments, we wait until at the end of all the speakers.
Well,
and then we'll give everybody the chance to speak to everybody, and please direct your questions at the time. Thanks very much.
Well, I don't really mind if anybody feels like talking, because I used to, once upon a time when I was much younger, to speak in Hyde Park Corner, and there you got very used to interruptions. In fact, if you made your voice heard at all, it's okay. Now, I'd like to read you just something here. For example, the actions of social workers in Devon are more like Stalin's Russia or Mao's China than the West. Now that's pretty extreme, isn't it? But it wasn't Ian Josephs who said that. It wasn't John Hemming. It wasn't Brian Garish, or it wasn't David Icke. It wasn't anybody like that. I'll tell you who it was. It was Lord Justice Aiken of the Family Courts who said that. And he should know. I'll give you something else that someone said. The determination of some social workers to place children in an unsatisfactory care system away from their families is quite shocking. Now again, that wasn't Ian Josephs, wasn't John Hemming, wasn't David Icke, or wasn't Brian Garish. It was the ex-president of the Family Court, Lord Justice Wall.
Hooray.
Now I'll just give you one other thing, which I will read, then I'll stop reading things. There is nothing more serious than a removal hearing, because the parents are so prejudiced in proceedings thereafter. Once you have lost a child, it's very difficult to get a child back. Now, who said that? Once again, wasn't Ian Josephs, wasn't John Hemming, wasn't David Icke, wasn't Brian Garish. This time, it was Lord Justice Thorpe. And I think that's the most important thing that any of the three judges said, because he is admitting, in fact, that the courts are prejudiced. He actually admits, the High Court judge, that the court is so prejudiced against parents, it's hard for them to get child back. Now, if he admits it, and he's the most senior judge in the family court, I think, bar one, then we must think it's true. So what can we do about all this? Well, it's a long story, really. You might wonder how, who am I to say anything? Because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a barrister, I'm a businessman with language schools, I live in Monaco, so who am I? Well, I'll tell you just briefly why I took this up and how I got into it. A long time ago, because I'm an old fella, in 1960 to 66, I was on Kent County Council. I was never really interested in politics, but some councillors came and asked me to stand, and I'm a businessman, and so I did. Well, after I'd been on a couple of years, I was the youngest person on it at that time, a woman came to me and said, they've taken away my son, and it's not fair. He's got a very high IQ, near genius level he has, and they won't tell me where he is, and they say he played hooky from school. Well, that's because he was bored and he was bullied for being clever. So I want to see him, and they won't tell me where he is or let me see him. He's about 12 years old. So I went to the children's department, quite innocently, and said, can I go and see him for this mother? And they said, no, you're not on the children's committee. You may be a counsellor, but it's none of your business. Well, I thought it was, because she lived not far down the road from me, and was one of the electors. So I put down a motion in full council that I should be allowed to see this boy when the council met every 3 months. And of course, it was defeated 104 votes to 1. It's amazing how people club together and don't want anything different. But the press were there, and they kicked up a fuss. It was on the front page of the Sunday Express, so I got to see this boy, and I went to this school, so-called, which I found was owned by Otto Shaw, who's well dead now, so I'm not libelling him. And he was deputy leader of the Labour group on the council, as it so happened. The fees he charged were about 2.5 times what it cost to go to Eton for Prince William and Prince Harry. And I saw Trevor, this boy, and spoke to him. He said, why doesn't my mother write to me? I said, she writes every day. Why don't you write to her? And he said, well, I write every day. So we got that out of the way, and I said, what's this school like? He said, it's terrible. He said, we learn nothing. Nobody learns anything. So I said, well, isn't there anything good about the school? He said, and I promise you this is true. He said, yes, the money, that's good. I said, what money? Trevor said, we get very well paid when we sleep with one of the masters, one of the teachers. That was the best thing he could find about that school. As a result of that, I went to court and got this child out of care and put back with his mother, because the law was very different in those days. In those days, the parents could ask any lay advisor like myself, any ordinary person, to appear and ask for a care order to be discharged, and then they would come as witnesses. Well, as a result of that, I appeared for several mothers and fathers, mostly mothers, up and down the country, appearing against my own county council, which didn't make me best popular with my colleagues, but I never actually lost a case. But what I did do was lose my first wife and nearly lost my business as well, because I spent too much time on it. So after 6 years on the county council, and the last 3 of them doing so much of this, I gave up and had absolutely nothing to do with the care system at all, until about 5 or 6 years ago, the scandal of Professor Evan, what was his name? Professor Meadows, that's right, and the child care cases, the children who died, cop deaths, and Bill Bache getting them off, and the scandal. And by this time, the law had altered drastically from when I was doing this before. When I was doing that in the 60s, there was no secrecy for a start, and any layperson could present the case for the parents, and you could call any witnesses you want. Well, now this is completely gone by the board, as I found out, because I wrote a letter to the Daily Mail and said, it sounds as though it's worse than when I was involved. They passed the letters on to me from about 50 mothers who all wanted help. And so what could I do but try and help them? I'm in a totally different position than what I was when I was in my 20s, in the 60s. Now I'm a reasonably prosperous businessman living in Monaco with a large family, and I've got a bit of time to spare because 5 of my children work for me and help me run the business. So in no time I got a lot of parents contacting me who'd seen this letter in the Daily Mail. I started a website called Forced Adoption, and believe me, one thing I think I've left to posterity, if nothing else, is the phrase forced adoption, because about 6 or 7 years ago I started the website, I called it the forced adoption website, and now it's become a catchphrase for everybody. And it is the one thing which is the most horrible thing that can happen to anybody. To have your child not only taken, but taken away in such a way that you never see that child again, that you don't know whether it's alive or dead. And it may be just because the child was held to be at risk of emotional abuse. Now, this is one of the most horrible things they do, is to take a child for risk. I mean, if you think about it, supposing that you wanted to get engaged or something, and you went to a jeweller's shop and in the street and you looked at all this jewellery in the window, you'd be a bit surprised if a policeman tapped you on the shoulder and said, "I'm arresting you because I've seen you looking at that window. There is a risk that you might go and steal something." Because that's the same reason for taking children. A risk. Because we're all at risk. Everybody's at risk. One of us could quite easily be killed tomorrow walking across the road, which is a much bigger risk than most things. And another thing is this, that the judges, when they put children in care for risk, they don't compare the risk of leaving the child with parents who argue, or parents who are a bit dysfunctional and live a different lifestyle to those approved of by the social workers. They don't compare that risk with a terrible risk of putting children in care. Now, nearly half the people in prison were in care at one time or another, a survey showed. Another survey showed that 42% of prostitutes on the street were once in care. The academic standards of those in care are way below the national average. So you run a terrible risk when you put a child into care. And what's more, when a child has been in care, if this child is a girl, when they have children of their own, the social workers say, "Well, you never learnt how to parent, so we'll take your children." It can be self-perpetuating over 3 or 4 generations. It's a shocker, and it should never happen. It's one of those things. So, taking children for a risk, it shouldn't happen. So, what should happen? What should happen? Because I hate criticising anyone or anything without having some sort of solution. My own solution, which I think we ought to campaign for, is this, is that once upon a time, child cruelty was the province of the police. It was not the province of social workers. Now, if therefore the family courts were run in the same guidelines as criminal courts, or amalgamated with criminal courts, again, the parents would have the protection of the criminal courts. There'd be no secrecy. They could call any witnesses they wanted, and they would be innocent until proved guilty, instead of the other way around. Because any child now that has an injury which the parents can't explain, they're held guilty, and it's one strike if you're out. And this is the big difference. People say, what about baby P then? Baby P had about 60 injuries over a long period, but the social workers seemed to like her, and therefore they did nothing. And in fact, unlike some mothers who cannot see their children at all, baby P's mother, her surviving children, were taken to see her in jail. You know, it's one law for one and one law for the other. It's a shocking thing. So, this is, in fact, what I think should happen. We should go backwards in time. I know, old people think things were better in the old days. Well, in this case, they certainly were, because child cruelty is a wicked thing. But most of the people this happens to have not been cruel to their children. Because the people who are cruel to their children, they do not go through court after court after court fighting to get their children back. You have to assume, surely, that if parents will go from one court to another, being grilled by hostile barristers, saying, please give us our children back, they're not the sort of parents usually who would be cruel to their children or ill-treat them. You would think that in those sort of cases, most of those parents would win. Well, nearly all of them lose, because as this judge so wisely said, the courts are so prejudiced, it's very, very difficult to get a child back. So, also, I think you should consider, and we should all consider, where the taxpayers' money is going. Because the last statistic that I've got from the House of Parliament diary is that it's £37,500 a year, that's about £750 a week, is what it costs for every child in care. Well, that's a bit strange, isn't it? I mean, for the first child that somebody has, you get £20 a week approximately, child allowance. But if he's in care, it costs £750.
Cheaper Cheaper if eaten.
How much?
The fees are cheaper if eaten.
Oh yes, much cheaper at Eton. Yes, like I said earlier. It's so apart from the risk, the money is very badly spent. But that is because there is what I call a money train. You see, as I said, £20 a week approximately for the first child a mother gets or a father gets. But after that, if they're put in foster care with a private agency, and an awful lot of them are, the fosterers are paid about £400 a week, 400, 450, 20 times as much.
Per child?
Yeah, per child. Per child. If you've got 5 children, you're on you're on £2,000 a week. Mostly tax-free, because it's an allowance that's meant to be spent on the children. No one spends £2,000 a week on 5 children, because I had 5 and I never spent that, I promise you.
Just a quick interruption.
Yeah.
On the way down here today in the car, we actually heard an advert for a foster agency where they were saying the foster carers get £403 a week per child, and that was advertised on the radio.
Yeah, this is standard. Some of them get, if however you take on a child with disabilities, and they can be all sorts, you get nearly double that. So, you know, it's a real money spinner. But that is chicken feed compared to the real money makers in this business, because this business is driven by cash, not by idealism, not even by lust for power. It's driven by cash, because the agencies, the fostering agencies that place the children in foster care or find them for adoption, they get £27,000 approximately when they find an adoptive family. And if that one doesn't work and they have to find another, they get another 27 grand. Now, that's nothing compared with the fact that if they put them in foster care, they get anything from £1,500 to £2,000 a week. And that is real money, because out of that they have to pay the 400, admittedly, but it still leaves them with a lot of money for not doing very much. So it's no surprise that recently the National Fostering Agency, which was founded by social workers about 7 or 8 years ago, was making a profit of 10 million a year, and they've just sold it out for 130 million plus. Sold it. Very nice for 2 social workers who founded it.
The USA? They sold it to the USA?
Yeah, they sold it to a company called Graphite. I don't know, it might be USA. But I mean, there's no secret about it, it's all there. So that people in the industry, which I call it, they either make a very good living out of it, or some of them make an extortionate profit out of it, like the agencies. And you can bet that, I can't prove it, that some of the social workers get kickbacks from the agency for recommending them to find the foster carers. We did find from a Greek fellow, who may be known to 1 or 2 in the audience, I won't name him now, because I end up in jail, but his daughter stole the bank statements of her fosterer, who wasn't very bright, he brought them to her father, or had them sent to her father via a friend, and this bank statement showed that the foster carer was getting £425 a week, but out of that £200 a week was going to the social worker who bought a nice new car. Now, the father of this girl took these to the judge, and you can guess what the judge said. "How dare you," he said, "I can have you arrested for being an accomplice to stealing bank statements which are private. You will give those to me, and if I hear you telling anybody about this, you will be in jail." That is what that judge said. Covering up the system. And this is also what I think parents should know. If the judge says, as quite frequently, says, "Look, we think your daughter or your son is in danger of emotional abuse," or in danger from you? I think so as the judge. The social workers all think so. They're very experienced. The experts I've called in, they all think so. The Guardian thinks so. Do you really think all these people are wrong and you're right? Well, there's a simple answer to that, you know. It's an old saying. Birds of a feather flock together. All those people are part of the same system, making a living out of it. Some people make living selling apples. Some people make a living taking children. And these people all make a living taking children or helping the system works that takes children. And if they couldn't take children, they wouldn't do it. So this is the answer. And the answer also is that once they have done something, they never admit a mistake. I've never heard social workers say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we made a terrible mistake." Never once. Because like most government agencies, the cover-up. It's the cover-up. And I mean, everybody knows that people working for governments, wherever they are over the world, when they make a mistake, they cover up. It's the difference between public enterprise and private enterprise, that people working in any stage for the government, and it goes right up to the top. I remember Bill Clinton, "I did not have sex with that woman." Well, did anyone believe him? Or Nixon for that matter, so right up to that. So anything that the mistake they do, they will. The main thing is the cover-up. And the cover-up is, of course, the secrecy. Because Harriet Harman is the last person to give any figures, and she was Home Secretary 7 or 8 years ago, and she said that 200 people a year were being imprisoned for contempt of court because of breaking secrecy. And she said, "This worries me a lot." Well, it didn't worry her enough to actually do anything more about it. But it still means that these people are getting locked up for speaking. Now, I'd like you to think, you know, because think of the children's privacy, they say. Now, the Human Rights Act, one of the most important paragraphs is number 8, I think, the Article 8, that says that everybody has the right to a private family life, undisturbed by public authority. That's what it says. Now, I think anybody hearing that sentence would think that's good, because that is a protection for the family against the state. And that is how it's interpreted in nearly every other country in Europe who subscribe to it. It's a protection for the family. You've got a right to your private life, not the English judges. And that's why they should be locked up, because they have deliberately misinterpreted it. When I was at law school, I was always told that the main thing with a statute is to look at the people who drafted it and see what did they intend. Well, it's clear it was intended to protect the family against the state. But in England, Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland and Wales, it's interpreted as a protection for the state against the family. They say, oh no, the children have the right to privacy, and if you as parents say anything to anybody in public, then you are endangering your own children's privacy, and for that you'll go to jail, and plenty of people do. It's a shocking thing, the people who are jailed, sent to prison for speaking their mind, because surely, think what a democracy is. I thought that democracy meant that anybody who felt oppressed by the state could get up on a soapbox or speak somewhere here and protest about it, giving names and anything else. The right to protest against oppression, otherwise, what is a democracy if you can't do that? It becomes a dictatorship. But if you start holding a public meeting, if I start naming all the families that ring me up every day, I have 2 or 3 every day, that's about 1,000 in a year, new ones, you know, I'd be in jail as quick as a flash. So it's against all the tenets of a democratic country to jail people for speaking their mind. The judges have far, far too much power, far too much, because I'm taking the case, perhaps you've all read of it, and she's here today, of Vicky Haigh, for example, who I can name because it's been in the newspapers in the public domain. Now, she was accused, she was found to have coached her daughter to say that her father had abused her. Well now, whether that was right or wrong, to me, there was no evidence of it, one way or the other, but they found against her. In fact, there was more evidence for her because there were recordings. But nevertheless, she was found to have coached her daughter. Right, well, even supposing that's true, did she deserve to be told you can never speak to your daughter again for years? Never see her? Not even an email? Not even a phone call? And then a couple of years later, or a year later, she runs into her daughter at a car park of a garage where she couldn't possibly have known that her daughter would be with the father, speaks to her and gets jailed. Not for 3 days, not for 3 months, but for 3 years. 3 years jail. She did get 9 months knocked off on appeal. But the judges have too much power. No judge should be able to say, I forbid you to communicate with your own child even by email or phone. You know, even if the father or the mother's done terrible things, and some do, to say that you can't even speak on the phone to try and make amends is so bad. And it happens so often. There's some mothers, I know a mother who was jailed for sending a birthday card to her child who'd been adopted. Another one was jailed, a man was jailed, the father, for waving at the children in the street because they were in care, but they went past his house every day on the way to school in a car, and he waved at them. Jailed for a month, you know? But Vicky's was 3 years. Now, if you went outside and coshed an old lady and took her last £10 note, you'd probably get community service or a suspended sentence. But talking to your own daughter, 3 years. I always start from the premise, perhaps unfairly, that when people ring me up for help and advice, I always start to try and find out what the local authority point of view is. It's no good asking the local authority. Social workers say, you only hear one side of the case. All right, you ring them up and say, what's your side? We'll get an injunction. You mustn't say anything. That's their reaction. And, you know, and a well-known newspaper man, in fact, who's here, around here, is being threatened with contempt, and there's a big case going to come up about publications and about injunctions stopping people talking. So it'll probably get in the papers in the end, but I can't give more details now. It's
You can be jailed for saying that, yeah?
Exactly, yes. Well, guess who
I'm under a super injunction.
These injunctions are so tight that you can be put in prison for just telling someone about the existence. If I say I've got an injunction, I mustn't talk about Mrs. Brown, I can be put in jail for that.
Mr. Joseph, you tell me I'll be the wicked boy, I'll go to prison.
Yeah, well,
I would.
yeah. Well, I don't pretend to be the great self-sacrifice type myself. I'd hate to go to jail, but let me make the excuse that I couldn't help anyone from jail. While at the moment, I do receive an average of 2 or 3 calls, new people, every day, plus 2 or 3 ones which are following up on cases. Doesn't sound much, but 2 or 3 multiplied by 365, and you compare it, say, with Brendan, who said, you know, the lawyers, they can take up to 100 cases or even 200 in a year. I take 1,000, but I don't pretend to do what his solicitors do. All I can do is give advice by the phone. And that advice generally is the same as what Brendan told you. Fight every step of the way. If you get a solicitor or a barrister who says, go along with social services, sack them. I mean, how many times have I heard parents say, well, the barrister said that, don't worry, you're probably nervous going into court. You don't have to go in. You can wait in the waiting room. I'll go in and speak for you. They go in, they come out, sorry, you lost. They've taken your child. They say, don't oppose the ICO, the interim care order. Don't oppose that. We must save everything up for 6 months' time for the final care order. We mustn't give away our ammunition. What they really mean is we don't want to force the local authority to give away what they're doing. And you're crazy if you don't oppose it straight from the start. Oppose everything, like Brendan said, right from the start. Oppose, if you can, the emergency protection order, if there is one, though they hold those ex parte and don't even tell the parents about it. But if you can find out about it, oppose that. Oppose the interim care order. Oppose every step. Don't just wait, even if the order is granted. Don't wait till the final care order. At the moment, at any rate, the ICOs, the interim care orders, only last 2 months, the first one, and then a month after that, generally. So you can keep on opposing them, going to court and saying circumstances have changed, which is a good ringing phrase that Brendan gave you. You have to find something that's changed for the better, but it shouldn't be beyond you to do that. Change. and oppose them every step of the way. But I'd say more than that. You know, I ask sometimes to parents who are under the cosh with social workers, are these social workers your friends or your enemies? Yeah. Well, they say that, but then they do exactly what they're told. Now, if you do in the war what your enemies tell you, I mean, going back in the old age to World War II, Mr. Churchill didn't do what Adolf Hitler told him to do, and he didn't give away what he was going to do. He didn't ring up Adolf and say, next week we're going to land in Normandy, you better be ready. You know, you don't tell them what you're going to do, and you don't help them in any way. Because if they say, cooperate with us, and you will get your children back, they're lying. They are lying. What they really mean is cooperate with us, cooperate with us, and we will get the evidence against you. Go on our parenting course, you will be failed. Well, they don't tell you that bit. Go and see a psychiatrist, he'll give you a rotten report. Go and see a psychologist, he'll say you've got a borderline personality disorder, whatever that means. How many people here have got borderline personality disorders? There you are. We're all suffering. If you don't like social workers, you've got a personality. Oh dear me. No, what you have to do is this, and this is what I advise, which isn't quite the same as what Brendan tells you, but I can only say it the way I think. As soon as social worker come near you, say, I'm very sorry, always be polite, I'm very sorry, I've been advised to have nothing to do with you. I'm not speaking to you, I'm not going to your meetings, I'm not going to be assessed, I'm not going to anything. And then, unless the social workers have got something really drastic against you, they haven't got enough to go to court on. Most of the evidence they get is from talking to you and getting you in various different positions. The most common thing, as Brendan said, is unexplained injury. Well, it's wicked, this. On one unexplained injury, that the child can be going into adoption. Kids of 1.5 and 2, toddlers, are always getting injured. My own grandchildren are always getting bruised. But it doesn't mean I hit them, you know, because I don't. But, you know, less fortunate people, they take them to a doctor and it's taken away. One strike and you're out. I think people who are guilty of child cruelty, they don't do it just once. In Baby P's case, there was a pattern of cruelty. But in the cases I'm talking about, just one instance, one thing that's unexplained, and a child can be taken. Of course, physical injury is a terrible thing. It's bad to injure a child. And people say, well, a big increase, you know, the number's doubled. In 3 years, they've doubled the number taking into care. There's now 65,000 children in care in England alone, let alone Scotland, Ireland and Wales. About 2,000 are taken every week. Well, you know, it's a terrible thing. And they say, well, look at Baby P. Now we've got to be more vigilant. It's a con. You may not know, but since Baby P, the number of children taken for physical abuse as a percentage of the whole has dropped. The number for emotional abuse has nearly doubled. So it's given them an excuse to take children, but not for the reason of cruelty. Because they don't want to know about a mother and father, or mother and stepfather like Baby P. There's this young social worker, as you say, she's just left college or something and got a degree, and she goes in, there's a horrible man who's drunk with 2 Rottweilers and smells, and no, I think I'll put that to the bottom of my visiting list. She wants to go to get nice children who are good adoption material, like several people here. They don't want the children who are being battered. So that's why, gradually, the number taken for physical abuse has gone down, and numbers for emotional abuse goes up. Because who knows what emotional abuse is? Yes?
I might get lynched here when I say this, but children that are abused, damaged goods.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the way the social workers look at it, if they're physically abused. But if they are emotionally abused, because in fact everybody's emotionally abused, I'm sure I was. My father used to shout at me non-stop when I was young, and you know, it's one of those things, wasn't it? But I mean, it doesn't kill anybody. Some people at clever Hampstead dinner parties will say, oh, you don't realise, Ian, emotional abuse can be far worse than physical abuse. Well, I say, which would you prefer to have? Which would you prefer, to have someone shouting at you, or parents quarrelling, or both your legs broken? I mean, there's no contest.
Well, you think it's amazing, social workers can see emotional harm and pain, that's the biggest crime. We've got to have a life sentence worse than hell, but you can't see baby P's injuries.
No.
Amazing, that.
Well, exactly, because they take a fancy to somebody, and this is why there are two branches of the law, public law and private law. Public law is parents against social workers in the state. Private law is one parent against another. But social workers are often called in, and once they take one side, the other side is wiped out. The losing side, whether it's a mother or a father, is often forbidden to see their own child ever again. It's a terrible thing, and sometimes the consequences can be very tragic. One of the worst cases I know was an Egyptian guy who was married to an Irish girl, and he took his daughter, who was about 12 or 13, on holiday to Qatar with him. And there on television, she saw someone being beheaded. She came back to school and told her fellow pupils about what she'd seen. Suddenly, bingo, she's been emotionally abused, been upset. She was taken into care. Well, the father was bereft and asked me what I could do. I said, you know, go to court and try and get him back. Before he could get to court, however, the social worker rang up and said, who's her dentist? We think she needs a dentist. Who does she go to? We want her records. So father gave them that without thinking very much. But the same day, and this is absolutely true, I promise you, in the evening, police came. And they said, we're very sorry to tell you that your daughter was out with her social worker, age 23, and had a car crash that was burnt alive, and we can only identify her body through her teeth, which survived. I mean, you can imagine what the father felt. In care, risk, and on top of that, I mean, this is one isolated case, I know, but the car, there was no other car involved, the weather was perfect, it was a straight road, and they ran into a tree the other side of the road from which they'd been going. I think the social worker must have been smoking cannabis or something, or doing something worse, because there was no reason for such a thing. But there was this father, he'd got his daughter one minute, next minute he was told she was reduced to ashes. The social worker turned up at the funeral and was told to get out. But, I mean, that's just one case, about the worst one I know.
I think the car had bald tyres, if I'm not mistaken.
Did it?
That's the same case that I'm thinking.
Is that really it? I don't know. I never got any more particulars. So, am I too late? Okay, I've got a few seconds more. I wonder if I've forgotten anything that I said I'd get in. Probably quite a lot, but I'll just have a look. Yeah, I didn't say much about the experts, of course. I mean, these experts, Professor Ireland did a survey. I mean, so many of them are not qualified. So many of them make a living going to court. And they get thousands of pounds for writing a report on somebody, sometimes who they've never even met. Because these experts, they go on the reports of the social workers. And you can guess what those are. Sometimes without even seeing the person. But they know that if they give somebody a good report, they're not too likely to be asked again. They sometimes might have to, 1 in 10, give someone a good report because they're confident some other expert, say if they're a psychologist, then perhaps the parenting class will give a bad report, so to compensate. But generally speaking, they'll always give bad reports because that's what they're paid to do. So any of you, if you want an expert, one I can recommend who came to the rescue recently, I can't tell you the details, but there's Professor Lowenstein. He's on my site as well. He's president of the Council of Psychologists, so he's senior enough not to bother, and he doesn't like social workers, and he doesn't like what the courts are doing.
Mr. Joseph, is Dr. Lowenstein, sorry to interrupt, is he recognised by the courts? Because I put him forward and he got immediately thrown out.
He immediately gets thrown out. That's the trouble. The only way I help somebody get him, I said the courts will not accept him, even though he's the most senior psychologist in the country. They won't accept him because they know his attitude. So she went and got privately a consultation with him, brought that to court. It was a bit of an explosion. I can't tell you really what it was about. But they said, oh, well, he hasn't seen the social worker's notes, therefore he's not impartial. Well, is anyone impartial reading the social worker's notes? I don't know. Anyway, but his report had to be accepted because he was so senior. But that is the only way to do it, is to approach him privately, and then if you've got a note from him, which he can do for £200 or £300, you know, not a whole a whole examination, but he can give you something to say that you're not suffering from any psychological ailment or something like that. And if you take that to court, they've got a job to get rid of it.
Actually, I have been seeing the first time recently.
Yeah?
He wrote quite a good report about me. I was in court 2 days ago. Reviewed the report and even refused to read his report.
He refused to read it?
Yeah, it's absolutely, actually criminal. So, and I have actually judgment which I'm not in my right to say. Problem is, I'll try to appeal, but I got the feeling that court was extremely scared of his report.
Of course they are.
You see, so social worker and everybody else read his report, but judge refused even to read it, accusing that he didn't have a right to write what he wrote actually.
Yes,
Just
I think,
what
I
to do
don't
next.
know, Brendan will tell me probably that. It seems to me you would have good grounds for appeal if the judge refused to even consider a report from the president of the International Council of Psychologists. I would think that was the reason for appealing, because a judge is bound to consider all the evidence. He's not obliged to agree with the evidence you produce, but if he didn't even read it and consider it, I would think you had a good chance for appeal on those grounds.
Well, the thing is, judge gave few reasons for appeal. Barrister looked into it and she said it was some valid reasons and some not valid reasons. So, basically what happened, I was referred by GP to him in order him to say, basically I was actually drafted for the cognitive behavioral therapy. But he says not only that, he answered not only this question, but he basically said the social worker were not right to remove my son.
He said what?
And he actually expressed his view. The social worker did not have a right to remove my son.
No,
yeah. So judge basically accused him that he basically said what he was not basically was asked to. Sort of, she basically tried to find some loopholes, but at the end, barrister said that there are valid reasons, there are not valid reasons just for the appeal. So
what was the result of that?
I don't know yet. It happened basically the day before yesterday, you see.
So I'm basically
considering
all sorts of... consult Brendan a bit about that, because it's totally wrong that he could disregard an opinion from such a distinguished man. His CV is so long. I mean,
she said that he compromised, and it's. I think this judgment is absolutely, laughable. But I really would appreciate it if I could, consult with some, senior solicitors.
No, all I can say is you should appeal and you should get advice from a solicitor who can really help you. I've been told I'm going to wind up, so I just want to emphasize what we want, because, as I say, I hate to criticize all over the place without suggesting a remedy. And the remedy, I think, is quite simple. What we should campaign for is that parents should have the same rights as rapists and murderers. In other words, they should have the protection of the criminal courts, innocent until proved guilty. Call your own witnesses. In an important case like removal for adoption, forced adoption, which is totally wrong, and I haven't talked much about that, you should have a jury before anything like that's considered. In fact, I don't think a child should ever be adopted against the will of parents at all. I think it's right there to say stop it. But if it is going to happen, it should only happen if a jury says so.
Can you start with stopping the secret courts?
Well, of course, the secrecy, there is no secrecy in the criminal court, you see. So if they were governed by the rules of the criminal court, like I say, there's no secrecy, and like I say, innocent until proved guilty, and all the protections. The last thing I want to talk about, I'm sorry, just 2 minutes more, is this, that the way that children are treated when they're taken from their parents and contact is arranged with parents at a contact centre. Now, your rapists and your murderers in prison are allowed to telephone and they're allowed to receive visitors without their conversation being censored. These children who are taken, who've done nothing wrong, even the social workers say they're nothing wrong, if they're aged about 6 to 12 and 13, their mobile telephones are confiscated. Their laptops are confiscated. They are isolated from parents and friends. And if they see their parents, they're not allowed to discuss their case. They have far less rights than people like Dr. Shipman, Mara Hindley, the Sutcliffe, They all have more rights than these children.
They're being groomed.
They're being groomed.
I said to the social worker last week, who's taking care of Lewis and Ryan Freeman, I'm the grandmother of Lewis and Ryan Freeman, I said to her, you are grooming them and it's got to stop. And I said, you're no better than Jimmy Savile, who groomed children.
Well, I think we're going right.
When they're old enough to go primary school, they brought in the sex education. And that's great, isn't it?
And that's exactly as she said, what Savile did. So as far as I'm concerned, we're living in a paedophile state, and the only way to sort this out is revolution. And I don't mean armed revolution, but to my mind, social services has got to go. I don't like them, I hate them.
They say politics is the art of the possible, they say, and I think it's possible, not likely, that we could transfer back to the criminal courts to deal with parents who are with cruelty for children, and scrap these family courts where everybody clubs together, where even the Lord, which I read at the beginning, the Lord Chief Justice Thorpe, says that the courts are prejudiced against parents. So if they're prejudiced, he shouldn't even sit in a court that's prejudiced, or he should do something to stop them being prejudiced. But he doesn't. So,
again, evidence. Children who are taken into care or forcibly taken away, their parents are not being asked what sort of foods they like, what are their likes and dislikes. And
Oh, yes,
that's nowhere is it coming up anyway. And I think it's an important point.
Yeah, it's a disgrace, but it's just part of the general picture, isn't it? I mean, these children are treated worse.
It's mentioning by everybody. I mean, all these things are staying quiet. I do research constantly, and he stays quiet.
Well, that's why I'm talking here. I'm just putting a little bit of publicity in, hoping that you all go away and talk to other people about it. But I agree that the secrecy, it doesn't exist in any other country in the world to the extent it does. In some countries the courts are held in camera, but you don't jail people who come out. A parent who loses their children should be able to say, I've lost my children, help me please, it's not right. But they're not. They're put in jail if they identify themselves. And, which gives you a clue, because publicity is the only thing these people are frightened of. Give enough publicity and maybe we can change the system. You won't change it any other way.
But then again, they control the BBC.
Well, to a certain extent, the BBC, certainly they don't give a platform to somebody like me. The only time they did ask me to talk, they cut it out completely. so I never got I recorded it for half an hour and I never got a word in. Right, now I do have to wind up. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I want you to go away and tell everybody you can about this terrible system. In today's Daily Mail, there is the story of a woman with 20 police arrived in the middle of the night, at 6 o'clock in the morning, to take her child away. They've had to give it back because it was Munchausen syndrome. They said she was inducing. There was no evidence. This is typical. Read today's Daily Mail, you'll see it. Okay, I won't do more publicity for the Daily Mail, but thank you all for listening.